The official autopsy, the one performed by the state's own medical examiner, is finished, complete, sitting in a file somewhere in Jackson County. The public still can't see it.
In the investigation of the death of a young man, Nolan Wells, the state's autopsy is complete, but is being kept secret. Isn't an autopsy a public document? Why is it being kept hidden from us, the public? What is in that autopsy, the first autopsy of Nolan Wells?
That single fact has detonated online. Theories, leaked documents nobody can verify, accusations flying in every direction, some of them serious enough that people are now under FBI scrutiny, with at least one arrest already made over threats connected to this case. We're not adding to that pile. We went and found what's actually on the record, from the prosecutor's own office, about why this report is sealed, what has to happen before the public ever sees it, and why that weight alone is pushing this case toward a breaking point. Because the real answer isn't the one most people online are guessing. Stick around. We're breaking down exactly what's public, what's sealed, and why, and we'll keep tracking this case as it develops. Subscribe so you don't miss the moment this finally moves.
The fact that we have learned tonight that the state's autopsy is complete, but it's being kept secret.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Being held for the grand jury to look into that. And the fact, as you brought up, Nancy, earlier, that part of his throat was missing, will that be key? There's so many questions around this, but right, it's a public record, but we're not hearing about it. I guess they're waiting for the grand jury to show them that first.
Joe Scott Morgan, death investigator. I've never known an autopsy report not to be a public record unless they're claiming ongoing investigation.
Yeah.
Now, in the D4VD David Anthony Burt case, the LAPD demanded the medical examiner keep it secret because the medical examiner's office allegedly was leaking information, possibly for money. Don't know that yet, but I will. How common is that the medical examiner is ordered not to release the autopsy? Why is the autopsy being kept secret?
Because it's continued investigation. They're going to go to grand jury with this. I can tell you that. I'll bet you dollars to donuts if that's the case. We see it with, we saw it with Idaho 4, right? We didn't have it there. We don't have it with Charlie Kirk. You know, that's an ongoing event. This is being investigated. And, you know, the point of contact here is an interesting situation here because you have the state medical examiner, but you also have a county coroner. The state medical examiner provides a service to the county coroner. The coroner is an elected official. He does not do these autopsies. And so the coroner is going to be the gatekeeper relative to any kind of document. But with that said, under state statute, the DA, the prosecutor, they can say, look, you're going to hold off on releasing this report. So it's being held at this point in time. Now, the reports that we're hearing are saying that it is complete. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you have a complete autopsy report, that means they've got tox, they've probably got histology, which is going to be the tissue studies, and they actually have the anatomical autopsy report that has been completed. That's what, I think it was ABC that was reporting that. I can't validate that, but that's what is being leaked out at this point in time. So they have this report. I think the question is, and this goes back to you, my friend, is that if this is going to be a grand jury thing, when is it going? And when is the medical examiner going to be called and summoned to speak to this? That's what everybody's going to be hanging on, in my opinion.
Hold on. Joe Scott, you mentioned the tox report. That's a blood panel done. Was he drinking? Was he using drugs? A lot has been made.
Or had he been given something?
Witnesses stating Nolan was drunk. Okay. Does that really change anything? Does that change anything unless he died of acute alcohol poisoning? Because I guarantee you, ain't anybody on that boat that's afraid of a cocktail. Okay? So if he was drinking, what difference does that make in whether he was killed or whether he died of an accident, Joe Scott?
Well, listen, Nancy, I know you're a teetotaler, but let me tell you something. the drunker you get, the more alcohol you take on board, it lessens your ability to defend yourself. It lessens your ability to make good decisions. And so we see this played out all the time in the medical legal world. And that's going to be the measure here, I think, relative to tox. Everybody wants to see the toxicology because that's going to give us an idea chemically what is in this young man's system. Was he able to do for himself at that point in time? And that's another problem that arises here.
To understand why this case is stuck in limbo, you have to understand there are two autopsies here, not one. The first is the official one. On July 7th, 3 days after Wells disappeared, 1 day after his body was recovered, the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office performed its autopsy. This is the exam that weeks later would be finished and then sealed, headed for a grand jury instead of the public. But by then, Wells's family had already lost faith they'd get answers waiting on the state alone. So they did something families in high-profile cases increasingly do. They paid for their own. 3 days after the state's exam, on July 10th, forensic pathologist Dr. Roger Mitchell performed a second, independent autopsy. Mitchell isn't a random hire. He's the president of the National Medical Association, the oldest and largest organization representing black physicians in the country, with a career built on exactly this kind of high-scrutiny case.
The second physician that did the autopsy, who, by the way, is highly respected, a former chief medical examiner for D.C., that was retained by the family, he didn't see any evidence of fractures. All right. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't a concussive event. I'm talking about being hit in the head, and you can have stuff that's contained within the cranial vault that might not be presenting. But again, back to what I said earlier, I find it very interesting that this doctor is commenting on the state of the decomposition when he sees the body, and that's problematic. It's very problematic when you're trying to make an assessment. You're already absent the organs of the neck. You're absent intact lungs. And, because the specter of drowning is on the table as well. So if you want to make a thorough scientific assessment, he's kind of handcuffed, isn't he, at this point?
12 days later, on July 22nd, attorney Ben Crump stood at a podium at the NAACP's National Convention in Chicago and delivered the results. They weren't what anyone wanted to hear. Not a clear cause of death, not a smoking gun. Undetermined, pending further investigation. And Crump himself was careful here. He acknowledged the independent autopsy found no evidence of wrongdoing. What it found was something messier, too many unanswered questions to reach a conclusion in either direction. Here's why. Mitchell's report laid out exactly what he didn't have access to. He couldn't directly examine Wells's airway or lungs for signs of water. He couldn't examine stomach contents. Toxicology results weren't back yet. And critically, portions of Wells's throat simply weren't present when the body reached him, because that tissue had already been retained by the state during its earlier exam. Outside forensic experts have pointed out this is standard practice. Medical examiners routinely hold tissue samples for further testing. But standard or not, it left a gap. Because of that gap, Mitchell said he could not rule out an injury to the neck as a possible contributor to Wells's death. Not confirmed. Not ruled out. That single sentence sits at the center of this entire case. Mitchell also documented red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Wells's head, and again, stopped short of a conclusion. What caused it, and whether it had anything to do with his death, remains unclear. Outside experts backed up why this autopsy landed where it did. Forensic pathologist Dr. Priya Banerjee pointed out that second autopsies almost always run into this exact problem. A body already examined once is never in the same condition for the next pathologist. Former medical examiner Dr. Michelle Dupree called the whole picture equivocal. No fractures, no deep tissue injuries, but a decomposed body and a mark nobody can yet explain. So that's autopsy number 1. Inconclusive, but at least public. Autopsy number 2, the state's, had full access to Wells's body before anything was removed or decomposition went any further. It's arguably the more complete exam of the two. It's also finished. Completed. Sitting in a file in Jackson County right now, and the public still isn't allowed to see it. So why is it sealed? Not maybe, not sources say. Here's the actual, on-record answer. Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McIlrath has said plainly that withholding the report until it reaches a grand jury is standard procedure in her office, not a special protocol built for this case, not something invented because of who Nolan Wells is or the attention his death has drawn. According to McIlrath, nearly every non-natural death that comes through her county follows this exact same path.
Every death in the county, except those of natural causes and non-criminal car wrecks, are presented to your grand jury. Many people don't know that. We have handled death investigations in this manner my entire career. Nolan's case is being handled the same way, with the same care and the same commitment to the truth that we handle all death investigations. I understand the public's urgency to know what happened to Nolan, but we are not taking time for time's sake. We are taking the time required to complete the work this investigation demands.
Online, there are people insisting this silence proves something, that officials are protecting someone, hiding a finding, running out the clock. But if the DA's own words are accurate, this isn't a decision made about Wells specifically. It's a policy applied broadly, to virtually every case like his. Here's what a grand jury actually is, for anyone who's never had to learn this the hard way. It's not a trial. There's no defense attorney cross-examining witnesses, no judge weighing objections in front of the public. A grand jury is a group of ordinary citizens, meeting in private, reviewing whatever evidence prosecutors bring them, autopsy findings, witness statements, forensic reports, to answer one question. Is there enough here to formally charge someone with a crime? That's it. Not guilt, not innocence. Just, does this case move forward? And by design, grand jury proceedings are confidential, not because of this case, but because of what a grand jury is, everywhere, always. Evidence goes in front of a grand jury in secret, specifically so an investigation isn't compromised before prosecutors are ready, which means the state autopsy isn't necessarily being hidden. Under this framework, it's being handled exactly the way Mississippi law enforcement says it handles every case like it. Here's what's easy to miss in all the noise, though. Early in this investigation, even the Wells family's own attorney was pushing for exactly this process. In mid-July, Ben Crump stood with the family and demanded a thorough investigation, every fact in front of the grand jury, nothing held back. At that point, the grand jury wasn't the enemy, it was the goal. So if the process is standard, if even the family's own legal team once called for it, why does it feel, a month later, like patience has completely run out? That's where this case stops being about procedure and starts being about everything sitting on top of it. The sealed autopsy isn't the only thing this case is waiting on. While Mississippi's process grinds forward, Wells's family didn't just commission a second autopsy. They commissioned an entire independent review of the timeline itself. Every photo, every video clip, every GPS data point, every witness account anyone could gather from July 4th. 22 pages, built by analysts working for the family's legal team, with one goal: reconstruct, minute by minute, what actually happened between the moment Wells was last seen and the moment that boat left the island without him. Their conclusion, in the report's own language, a material gap, meaning this: somewhere between Wells's last independently confirmed sighting and the boat's documented departure, the evidence runs out. Nobody, not the family's own investigators, not the state, has been able to fully account for that stretch of time. It's worth being precise about what that report does and doesn't say. It draws no conclusion, none, about criminal or civil responsibility. It doesn't name a cause. It doesn't point a finger. What it does is lay out, evidence by evidence, exactly where the record breaks down, treating it as a map of what investigators still need to resolve, not a verdict on what happened. That gap is now pulling in specialists from outside forensics entirely. Crump's team has brought in ocean engineering experts to work through a question that's been nagging at investigators for weeks. Given the tidal patterns around Horn Island that day, the pull of low tide against high, does it even make physical sense that Wells's body was recovered in nearly the same spot where he was last seen? Separately, forensic audio analysts are combing through the complete emergency call placed to CETO on July 4th, word for word, for anything the initial review might have missed. And then there's the phone. Wells's cell phone has become its own thread in this investigation. The family has raised concerns about gaps in its location history, and about whether anything was missing by the time it was recovered. An independent review of the device is now underway, separate from whatever the state has done with it. None of this is about the sealed autopsy. That's what makes it land differently. This isn't the public accusing Mississippi of hiding something in a file somewhere. This is the victim's own family, with their own experts, saying, even with everything we've gathered ourselves, we still can't fully account for what happened to our son that day. Two separate things, both still open. A government process moving on its own timeline. And a set of facts nobody, not prosecutors, not the family, not independent analysts, has been able to fully piece together. That combination is exactly what's about to boil over. Here's the uncomfortable part. Its standard procedure is true, and it still isn't enough for a lot of people watching this case. Because standard procedure doesn't feel like an answer when you're the mother of an 18-year-old, standing in front of cameras a month after your son died, with nothing official to hold on to. In one of her only public statements since Wells was found, his mother, Christine Wells Wansley, described the silence itself as its own wound, said that having an independent autopsy in hand and still hearing nothing back from the people actually investigating her son's death was its own kind of devastating. That's the emotional core of this case. Here's the national one. This never stayed a local Mississippi story. Within weeks, it was on a stage at the NAACP's national convention, then the National Urban League's annual conference. Ben Crump, one of the most recognized civil rights attorneys in the country, is personally leading the family's independent investigation. Reverend Al Sharpton has stood beside them. That kind of spotlight doesn't attach itself to a case by accident, and Crump has been explicit about why he thinks it has. His argument isn't that this specific prosecutor is lying about grand jury procedure. It's bigger than that. He's pointed to what he sees as a pattern. Cases like this, he argues, move slower, get less scrutiny, draw fewer resources, depending on who the victim is and where they died. Mississippi's own Public Safety Commissioner, Sean Tyndall, went on national television to directly reject that framing, insisting the state he represents today has nothing to do with the version of Mississippi that history remembers. Two on-record positions. Neither one is a claim about what's inside that sealed file. Both are claims about whether the system around it can be trusted. That distinction gets lost fast online, and it's exactly the kind of gap a month-long silence was always going to fill with something. It has. With no official findings to point to, speculation rushed in, and not the harmless kind. State officials have had to go public specifically to warn people that fake documents are circulating, dressed up to look like real evidence in this case. Unverified claims, doctored screenshots, leaked material nobody can trace, all of it spreading around a single file nobody outside investigators has actually read. And it hasn't stayed online. Threats against people connected to this investigation escalated to the point that the FBI is now directly involved, and at least one arrest has already been made over threats tied to this case. Sit with that for a second. A death investigation that hasn't even reached a grand jury yet has already produced federal involvement in a criminal arrest, not because of anything in the sealed autopsy, because of what people have decided must be in it. That's the real cost of a month without an answer. So what happens now? Nothing, officially, not yet. Once Jackson County investigators consider the case complete, the state's autopsy, the toxicology results, and whatever else has been gathered, go in front of a grand jury. That body reviews the evidence in private and decides one thing: whether there's enough here to charge someone with a crime. Until that happens, there's no confirmed date, no announced timeline, nothing on the record about when, or even whether, the public ever sees what's inside that sealed report. That's not a satisfying answer. It's the honest one. While Mississippi's process moves at its own pace, the family isn't waiting on it. Their independent investigation is still active on every front we've covered. The ocean engineers still working through whether the tides that day even make the recovery location possible. The forensic audio team still combing through the original emergency call. The review of Wells' phone still underway. And now, a new track entirely. Attorneys on both sides are reportedly positioning for possible civil litigation, a sign that at least some parties expect this fight to continue in court, no matter what a grand jury ultimately decides. Two tracks, moving in parallel. One public, one sealed, neither one finished. Here's what's easy to lose after all the process and procedure. This started as a mother waiting for her son to come home from a boat trip. A month later, Christine Wells Wansley is still waiting, just for a different kind of return. Not her son, an answer. Something official, something real, to set against the completed report she isn't allowed to read, in a case that's already pulled in the NAACP, the National Urban League, a sitting state commissioner, and the FBI. Standard procedure explains why the file is sealed. It doesn't explain why that feels unbearable to the people who loved him, and it won't until someone finally opens it. We'll be tracking this case as it moves toward the grand jury. If you want to know the moment that happens, subscribe. We'll be here when it does.